Monday Street Fighter V Battle Lounge. We're doing the mix and match format today, and we are continuing our discussion on matchups and notes and levels of such things. So, as always, I am Konsuki Dynasty, and I have Rillian here with me on mic, and we are getting down to business. In this format, we have various lounges made by team members, and we are bouncing between them more or less. So if you want to join in and play, there are likely to be slots open somewhere or other, and so just look for 3 rounds, first to 2, character select on, and find any of our team members to join.
Okay, let's rumble. Let my beauty intoxicate you. Round 1. Fight!
In other completely unrelated news, I'm still terrible at using Twitch on my phone.
While they go through that, we've certainly been talking about the Alex matchup for me in last stream. But I should check what I have for my Vega matchup. Alright then.
I personally dislike this matchup quite a lot on both of my characters, not because it's actually not fun for me, or because it's specifically hard, but because I am a person who often keeps most of their notes and similar things just in their head. I have particularly good combat memory most of the time. But this is the matchup where that does not apply, and it's a perfect example of what we were discussing last week. I can remember everything about how to fight Vega on both Colleen and Chun-Li except the very first level, and this means I get destroyed by this character because if I don't have the notes, I always find myself going, I know how to fight this character, but why can't I stop you from doing X?
Vega wins.
One of the main reasons is because I am generally a player who deals heavily in footsies, but until Vega's Claw is gone, he's relatively good at preventing that or even just going along with it. Vega players will play footsies with Chun-Li in particular and emerge fairly victoriously. They're good at poking that space. What they're not good at doing is stopping her command normal down forward heavy kick. It can be done, but it's difficult enough that it adds a real level of confusion, a real level of stress to their game plan. If I don't do this though, then I just die, because there's no way to directly beat him in footsies without taking risks, and until I get particularly good at one other thing further down, which is currently a good idea for me, but not really all that hard for Vega to beat or outmaneuver. I won't go into what that is, as we're about to see this in different match form. But all the Vega player has to do is be relatively daring about their plans, and they have at least a decent chance of winning by overwhelming processing. This is a good way to win with this character in general. Present so many threats that your opponent doesn't know anything they can do. One weakness we have generally observed in Vega players, the mentality that presumably goes along with picking this character, is that they really hate to miss. As soon as they miss, they will keep on hitting buttons. Why this is really unclear, but assume that if Vega whiffs, more buttons are coming. Presumably because I guess he has so much advantage that he isn't really afraid of much. But your aim should be to outmaneuver his next button rather than to try to hit your own. Because most of the time, when Vega whiffs one button, he hits another, but that button is not more likely to hit you.
Vega wins.
Or if it is, it's often unsafe, and you are still better off just blocking.
It sounds like that might
This
be
is
something
very
that
difficult to do.
hits your attempts to whiff punish, however, depending on
Yes,
how good
unfortunately
you
it
are
does
at
exactly that all the time.
Yes, that was my experience when I fought my most recent Vega sometime last week. Anyway, my notes for the Vega matchup, from actually a very long time ago, I remember writing these, are that I should be using my stand heavy kick to stress him out about using his normals other than heavy punch, and then once he gets into the habit of using heavy punch instead, I should be using my stand medium kick to counter hit and annoy him out of that. I don't actually know if these are still relevant, as my style has developed a bit more or such, but I don't necessarily have any reason to doubt them, so I'll go in considering that, more or less. I find personally that Vega tend to be extremely bouncy, or cause me all of the trouble with the whiff punishing, basically like was just discussed.
Round 1. Fight.
So it's time to see which type this is.
I feel somewhat as if that heavy kick plays into the same sort of mindset. It pushes them to a space where the only thing a Vega player really wants to do at that space is hit another button. Because you're not supposed to be quote-unquote allowed to get there. The fact that you got to the point of being able to hit that heavy kick is actually usually a sign that something went wrong in their game plan.
Would that imply then that it is not necessarily the first level of this matchup? That I would probably need to find something else in terms of getting there? Or is it just that my base style would cover
but sometimes it is notable that sometimes the very first thing in a matchup is something simple that we just always do because it's part of the game. And often these are not things you write down as matchup knowledge. For example, I would say that it's probably the first thing that happens after you've managed to air or anti-air the Vega player enough times. But if you can't manage that, then there's no chance of you ever getting into the space to hit the heavy kick, as they'll just keep on doing things like fly around the screen and eventually hit you that way. So the difficulty here is the mental space of realizing, oh, I can't just go for the heavy kick. He's not going to instantly start losing because of the heavy kick. I must do the most basic requirement first. Walk him down, anti-air properly, and so on, and then I can heavy kick.
Indeed. We basically saw that last round. He got into his aerial nonsense, I'll call it, and I just got destroyed by that. Because I don't have quite enough practice on the spacings and such for air-to-airing his movement, especially since it's so variable. However, this time around,
Vegabot does teach this, but the way it teaches it is something you don't actually see because it aims to teach you to deal with Vega players who are specifically trying to be effective. It's very important that you understand that there are so many ways he can do that move. Some of them are hard to deal with and some of them are easy.
Round 1.
The easy ones are not the ones that the bot deals with, meaning that if you recognize that the thing you trained on Vegabot does not actually work, it probably means that there's an even easier way to deal with it.
And there is that whiff punish problem. Thankfully my Vega is a little aggressive and impatient, so I can always wake up DP. So far. But he had the space to get the air control.
Round 2.
The easy answer to a Vega who is not specifically trying to mislead you to do complex ones is that you don't have to do anything at all. Most of the time you can literally stand right where you are, and they are forced to reposition themselves in the air at the last moment to things you can block, things you can uppercut, all sorts of things.
I see. I'm used to getting hit by the throw one, but I suppose actually I don't see it that much. Which actually brings me to the question if that's EX only or some such.
No. Again, the entire point of this sort of player, this point of this character, is to mentally overwhelm you and make you unable to have proper responses because you're just not calm enough to.
Yes, my alternative is I can just Seppo out of literally everything he does in the air. And probably if I use the medium one, for half of those times I can just hit him after.
This is actually a strong tactic in a lot of parts of this game. To make your opponent so afraid of you that even when you're doing something completely non-threatening, their response is incorrect, because generally fighting game players, until they get much better, respond to the very first part of whatever it is they're faced with. Meaning that a lot of people are trained to respond to Vega wall dives as at the moment he jumps off the wall. Their focus is, he's off the wall, I have to be ready to do this, but they respond too early, they respond without understanding which method he used for the wall dive, and so on, meaning that you really just don't have any way to win, because you're not watching for what he actually does in the air, you're watching for the fact that he did a wall dive.
It doesn't help that it's a tighter reaction once you're reacting to what he's doing in the air. And so it's, in a way, easier to react to the wrong thing. And sometimes that little bit of mental effort can be all it takes to just build poor habits.
For most players, the easiest way past this is to simply use their meter to resolve the problem. Because it's not as if you can't use your meter on him. It's that it's usually that you run out of it eventually.
On the other hand,
The
I
other
suppose
option is, as demonstrated here, be way, way more annoying yourself.
just what I was about to mention. Oops. Oh, that was nerve-wracking.
Round 2. Fight.
But yes, I was mentioning that the useful thing about this type of player is that they don't want to just stand around. So if I do simply constantly evade them, they'll change to another more pokey method where they're actually likely to be able to hit me. And then I can do this. Ah. I'm sure that was very obnoxious. And there we have it. Vega, from the skies.
You win.
However, that leaves me in the interesting position of having basically no idea what else to write down for that. Because while obviously the heavy kick and the medium kick are relevant, they're relevant after I get it to that part of the game. And I feel like I should leave some kind of note for myself about it being, about effectively seppoing away and relying on the opponent's impatience. But let's check on the other lounge while we're at it. For varying reasons, I feel like one, that would somewhat be less valuable in higher levels because I would meet Vega that have a little bit better control of their patience. But also, I don't seem to remember what my also was, but I'm sure it existed.
It's always important to recognize your own level as well. When you are writing your notes, put them in whatever order you find to be useful for yourself, and when you stop facing opponents who do a particular thing, you may not need that note anymore. But even then, there's no harm in putting that in your notes. After all, there's no harm anywhere in such things. The only thing you can ever worry about is, am I going to mislead myself about what is going on here? And the easiest way to avoid misleading yourself is to make sure that your notes are in the same order that you play the match in terms of the match's evolution. I.e., the important thing here is not whether or not one writes down the fact that you can seppo away from wall dives, but rather making sure that this is not written after the heavy kick in whatever note format you have.
Indeed.
Since putting it after it, even if you knew that there was potential for this, sometimes you just don't have the time to mentally decode what yourself from 6 months ago, a year ago, meant in terms of how to approach a matchup that way. And you also don't necessarily have time to read through an entire dissertation on how the matchup is to be played. So, definitely write down anything you feel is relevant, but make sure it's in the correct order for needing your opponent to do one thing or another. And if you find that it doesn't work that way all the time, add a second note. A note to tell yourself, if the player is this way, don't do this. We actually spent a lot of time at one point of our content going over how to classify players. Most of this is still relevant, but as we noted back then, when you get higher up, players tend to round out their skill sets. So you might face someone in a certain level of game that basically wants to close in all the time, doesn't have all of the defensive skills required. So they always try to close in. They don't really tactically think about it that hard, and they don't really push for any other method whatsoever, meaning that you just have to recognize that they play like that, understand how their character works relative to that, and do your best. When you start looking at gold ranks and higher, usually the player will still have that, but they've been forged in the fires of silver and ranking up to recognize, I can't do this literally all the time. I need to have a different skill in order to make my opponent think something else and not be constantly ready for my close-in effect. So there's usually at least one more thing, which is why we don't go so much into that anymore. It is still a little worth it to put in for your notes, primarily because if you are playing a short set, if you're playing at a tournament, if you're playing someone new and unfamiliar, a person that is new and unfamiliar, they may not have any reason to try to play the game in any other way. They may be one of those people who immediately attempts their best tactic and will do it until you prove you can stop it. And for that reason, we often end up writing down those things with that intention, making sure that you remember, wait, if my opponent does this and only this, can I defeat it?
So now the obvious question is there a player type that you would have me particularly associate that note that we just made with? Obviously, specifically how I wrote it is Seppo out of wall dive to imbues impatience, and with the side note that impatient people get sick of not hitting me and switch to either jump nonsense or grounded pressure that I can more easily deal with. So it includes the recognition of impatience, but is there a certain way to describe that player type? Because I wouldn't call who I just faced, well, I wouldn't know what to call who I just faced.
Frustration?
I suppose so, yes.
I think it might depend on the type of player you are, personally. I, for example, never write down the thing that the frustration player does because I'm always looking for it. Because I'm trying to be annoying first.
Indeed. I would like to be annoying, and it annoys me very much that I don't get to. In that case, I think that I would definitely notice it and come up with it myself, but the reason that I write it down is actually not so much because it wouldn't be obvious in a way, but because I know that I might have a tendency to be stubborn, or my mind would be a little resistant to, like, finding that particular answer, because, well, it's obvious. It's a lot of not trying to air my opponent, which, for those of you who have heard the more concise definitions of my style, is something I like to do.
In that case, it may be that what you've written down is backward.
Ah.
Because the thing you're really trying to do here is not specifically make sure you sepple. It's withhold your instinct to air everything.
I suppose. Yes, and Seppo is just the natural consequence result of that. But that raises the other question of, is this really the right thing to write down? Because the only reason I don't air as much, well, in my personal opinion at this point, is because I don't have enough practice at it against him. And so writing it down as like a matchup level that I shouldn't do this, I sort of feel like it might end up making me think later that, well, no, there was some reason this just doesn't work, and then I would obviously not end up training it.
And with that, you have managed to question the note itself out of existence. Systems.
I suppose.
Because I, too, have to avoid air-to-airing that character. Particularly when he's doing very specific things. But I have the same problem. It's really more so about getting good enough to know this one's an air-to-air, this one's an anti-air, this one I should get out of the way, this one I probably should ignore and see if he actually does a grab and just block. And go down the line like that to understand yourself rather than trying to do something matchup related that you then have to remember.
At which point it's not really a matchup note at all. Or, more specifically, it's actually that same type of temporary matchup note. Checking the other lounge again. This is a sort of temporary matchup note that should go away once I've actually built a little skill with it. That somehow I feel like was the start of the consideration. So actually, I think that you're right, and this note is just going to be deleted, and I'll put in my long form notes for Vega something to that effect.
recognizing that you need to improve or expand as a player in some way shifts a lot of things rather than letting you go forward with just, oh, I should do this in this matchup, I should do this in this matchup.
Round one. Fight.
I still miss the old UI so much.
Fight.
I wish they would give you a switch for it, but I suppose branding or effort or, well, something.
Final round. Fight.
I do really appreciate this high-speed version of going through things, though.
Fight.
It's a nice artifact of how they keep in sync, because you sort of get to get a basic idea of what's going on in the match and what the players are doing, even if it's fast-forwarded. You can see jumps, you can see footsies happening, you can see lots of fireballs, or certain specials.
Round two. Fight.
That's a lot of fireballs. But you can tell this Bison is a close-in player, or doesn't have a strong understanding of certain tools of their character. So from that alone, you could probably make some form of plan relative to it. Because this whole head stomping fireballs thing clearly doesn't work. But absorbing it and throwing it back isn't necessarily something they seem to be trying just yet.
Either they're not familiar with their V skill, or they just don't trust it or don't feel like it. But from what
My
you just
assumption
find,
would be,
it's very, very useful.
I would assume it doesn't feel like it. Because if you watch everything else they do, there's a lot of, okay, I know that I have a chance here to get closer, so I'm going to get closer. They do back off at a particular spacing, which causes the opponent to jump.
That's just having the opponent get closer for them.
Generally, that's a good way to think about it. Not everyone plays close-in characters by a relentless approach. If they think you're going to come to them, there's no reason to do this.
So anyway, having updated my long-form notes for Vega, I added that I really want to anti-air, or sorry, air-to-air Vega's wall dives. And I should absolutely train that, but if I want to win without grinding that, I can abuse many frustration Vega's impatience by evading them with Seppo to get them to come to the ground and do other more frustrating things that I can fight with. But having written that honestly just brings me back again to questioning the note in the first place, because, well, at that point, wouldn't I just really want to be trying to train it? I guess it might be useful if I face Vega in tournament or ranked in certain cases, though.
Well, these games always have an issue of limited time. In fact, there's been like a trend on Twitter lately of top-level players talking about how long they played before they stopped like going 0-2 at tournaments. And you have to get used to this. The idea of going to a tournament, it is often repeated that half of the entrants of any given tournament bracket go 0-2. Literally half the people.
Yeah.
Going 1-2 immediately makes you average or just above average by definition.
I think I confused myself in that math again. You obviously, if you lose the first your first match, you're obviously straight up in half the people. Oh, it's the recurrence relationship that confused me. It really is half, huh?
Is it? I might be wrong
No,
about
that's
this.
not right. Because if you have to lose both of your first two matches, half the people will lose the first one, and then half of that set of people will lose the second one.
Right. I remember now. It just goes to show how little people actually think about it. Like, the fact that I can get that wrong
Indeed.
comes from the fact that no one is paying attention to this.
Yeah. I think 1-2 gets you... One
Maybe.
shot gets you half the people. I don't know how many more people beyond that it also gets you. No? Yeah, see, I just have no idea, because I'm pretty sure that by my quick in-my-head calculation, I've disproved that too. So if you're interested,
Either
go
way.
do the math, example brackets or whatever, but it's certainly not what y'all expect if you're just thinking about it from the perspective of, ah, dang it, I went 0-2, I must completely suck. Especially at a large tournament.
But back to the actual point of that, like, we've been hearing some Twitter stories lately of people going, oh, I went O2 for like 4 years. Okay. But they're not really saying that as it's specifically meaning anything other than you should not get discouraged if you go O2 for 4 years. Look at me.
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited that I've managed to go 1-2 at one of my tournaments then.
But the other part of that, and the way to look at it the weirdest, is that there's really no deciding factor to that. You can go O2 because you faced, like, Momochi round 1. And then would have otherwise been able to maybe go higher, 3-2 or whoever, because you really would have only lost to the next opponent and then gone on a streak until you met Momochi in the end of the pool.
Yeah.
But the fact is that someone has to face Momochi first, and that person is unlikely to make it too far into the tournament right away.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've had a team member get double eliminated by K-Brad, just straight up.
Well, yeah, but at least that one was not... It couldn't have been O2 because they wouldn't double it up so fast. But it's basically the same thing, yeah, just... Okay, I did this, and then... Oh.
Bad luck.
We have a tendency to have that happen to us, actually, I think. Not like a massive tendency, but we do have a whole... Okay, I lost to you, and then we both got to the end of the bracket, and here we go again.
Yeah, I suppose I've seen that a bit.
Well, what we know about our Ryu players is that they are happy to zone. I mean, really happy to zone. And you can tell they're happy to zone because they are not only managing this, but they're the sort of person who can do cross-cut DP versus Alex Stomp.
Final round. Fight.
Indeed, that involves some degree of practice with this. I'm sure Amara could tell us roughly how many hours that is. Yeah, he's good.
Didn't miss the timing on that very slightly.
Alex wins.
coming all the way back around to the original point, the reason to write down the note is simply when you don't fight that character that often. My Fang notes, for example, every time I look back at my Fang notes, even when I'm not playing, I look at the notes and think, wait, really? That work? Wait, no, I can see where that works. Okay, but it's never something I'd immediately remember in a match. Because I fight Fang like once every 6 months, maybe? No, I occasionally do fight Fang when I'm like fighting some higher level person who is switching around characters, but like a Fang main that I have to understand what to do.
Round 2. Fight.
But that's also another part of the reason why, especially for the higher level, tiny matchup knowledge things. The things that you spend a lot of time figuring out, they're like literal technology level of this move interacts weirdly with this other move, or this move's charge time is just about enough that I can't be hurt when I go for this attack. Those things are really hard to remember because of the high level of technicality involved, and it's like remembering an entire character's frame data by rote. It can be done, but it's like less likely to happen when you're dealing with characters that you don't see very often.
Yeah, you can like figure out this weird thing that's like the total solution to the matchup. And you're like, oh man, this is so great, and it's like dominates your whole memory of the match and the matchup. But then 3 months later, if it's not a character you see often, regardless of how impactful or obvious it was in retrospect, there's no chance.
Some people will get it, and most of us will not.
And if nothing else, it saves you the effort of trying to remember the things, or remember the order or layers, or all sorts of stuff. And preloading all that, just even making it more efficient on you mentally, makes a huge difference in a fighting game where, like, the whole basis of the game is stacking up the layers and can you keep track of everything you need to keep track of, and be ready for as much of the matchup as you can. Don't want to waste.
That is a general way to look at it. Do not take every advantage you can get. At least if you're going to tournament. And if you're fighting against a friend that you fight often, you probably don't need to write notes on your friend. But if you are planning to play, even if not so to speak competitively, if you enjoy being able to play at your own max level, sometimes understanding enough of a matchup to do that is a real difficult test in memory.
Indeed. And so now let's see how I do against this Ryu. I have a lot of Ryu experience, particularly against Amara, but just also because you see a lot of Ryu at certain points in the lower ranks. But I don't know that I actually have any notes. However, the worst feeling is thinking you had no notes, then going back later and realizing you could have played the whole first 2 matches better. In this case, however, I in fact do not have notes. So we'll see if there are any worth making, or if I just innately know this matchup so well. At least up to the current level.
Part of the reason why it's difficult to make notes for popular characters is because people can approach them so differently, and what any given person thinks of as a strong tactic is not necessarily anything at all in that vein. If you watch really high-level Ryu, I've seen very few people that play like that. I can pick up things about the matchup when I play against someone high level, when I watch a high level match, when I watch a mid to high level match. Or when you just meet that one Ryu who, for whatever reason, doesn't play ranked a lot or something, but totally has a heavy mastery of their character. But recognizing that Ryu, relative to all others, requires sometimes that you play at a high level first.
Yes, it's really, for popular characters, perhaps more of an identification challenge than anything along the lines of even just remembering the matchup notes exactly. And I mean, this can be true for any character, but for popular characters where you're going to frequently see lots of varied styles, it can be, I guess, feel like more of a thing at least?
One really good way to do it, though, if you want to focus on something, is look at when certain specials are used, and particularly look at how their meter is used. There's a decent chance that a player who is very good at their character has a very large repertoire of correct times to use up their meter that you would not see otherwise. They may not always get it right, but you will start to see some things and find yourself wondering, wait, why did that hit me? And chances are your opponent was not just being completely random. If it's an uppercut, there's obviously a chance that they were just going for it. But other moves tend to be a little less in this vein. You often see that they are doing a thing because they know it will work, rather than because just sticking out this stuff is fine. The reason this is difficult and so important at the same time is because meter usage seldom feels like the key part of the match. If you're so used to playing other fighting games and other matches in this game, where your inability to recognize how to beat the strong tactic or the unfamiliar tactic is the deciding factor, when you're faced with a character like Ryu, who generally does this by actually playing, as people like to say, honest, and having a lot of things that have to be put together, you may miss the nuances of little things like, I'm going to EX Tatsu right here. And there's a specific reason for this. As you get better, you start to look more and more at where your opponent managed to get advantage in small ways, because you're so used to playing the match normally. And this will happen more and more as you get higher up in levels yourself in any form. Whether it is because you're actually winning and going up higher in rank, whether it is because you are one of those people who gets to play against a lot of people in battle lounges who have higher rank, or just similar to you, a lot of experience but don't rank up. And you'll notice all these little things about spacing, but you should generally spend more of your time thinking, why did they do that EX move at that moment?
Ooh, that was nice. I didn't even know that could, like, make sense as an anti-air. But it was a perfect one, and that was well baited, so. On to round 3.
Final round. Fight.
See, this person is already showing me how far I have still to go in the air-to-air game. Even though I've been training that for like a couple of weeks. Ugh, I deserve that completely.
And yet even that is more of a question of positioning that they're using to get to that perfect jumping space. Ryu is actually, as a character, quite good at this, because his jump is not floaty, his stand medium punch is strong, which gives him a lot of time after a jumping medium kick. The jumping medium kick can be spaced really well, his jumping light kick is also really good. Basically, there was a time where people were just super frustrated precisely by a couple of Ryu's jump buttons, because as much as he's the solid character, his jumps are quite good.
Well, normally it might make sense to switch lounges, but I'm gonna just be greedy. I want to fight this for you again. Although, do you think it worth actually, like, checking in on the other lounge?
At the moment, no, we're watching to see what happens here.
All right. Well, if he stays on top, I will definitely look forward to my rematch. Because that was fun.
There are also matchups where the thing that you want to write down is part of your offense and not part of your defense. This may seem really obvious, but you would be surprised sometimes how often one spends your entire time just writing down things you need to defend against, because humans are generally tilted towards remembering how to not lose rather than specifically remembering how to win.
Yes. And especially,
And obviously,
I say especially has a tendency, in sort of my style where I want to try and keep control of the situation a lot. Those can sort of blend together. Because I'll focus on what's making me lose control effectively. Regardless of whether it's, making me lose. Anyway.
Kage. So it's often important when you do discover a new thing against a character that lets you keep up your offense, that lets you put more pressure on them. Even if that may not be the primary level, still, stick it in underneath the other defensive stuff. If you're playing a character that gets pressure or offense started easily, it might even be further up than the defensive stuff. Or if you're playing against a particularly defensive character that you have to open up really well. Notes on Guile tend to look like this, as Guile isn't really a character where you need to understand a lot of complex things about how Guile functions. There's a couple things to know, but those are mostly frame data related and can be deciphered usually by hitting the buttons, remembering a spacing, and yes, you should probably still write it down, but there's definitely enough time to figure it out in a match because Guile doesn't have a lot of options to spend like super confusing you with. Learning how to keep pressure on him though, or change his expectations in a way that actually leads to a benefit for you, is a much more important note. And a lot of the time you run into this problem where playing as your own character across many matches, when you do have a matchup like Guile where you have to change a lot of what you do, it can be hard to remember to change all of the things at once. Leaving you with the feeling that, oh, I did everything that I wrote down the first time, but I'm still not managing to win for whatever reason. Because presumably, defeating Guile isn't so much about can you defend against Guile. Guile doesn't care if you defend against him for 50 seconds. Usually, depending on who it is, they'll just happily let you time out and that'll be enough for them. Or wait for you to get scared of timing out, try to get in, and lose anyway. As an example, even though I won't say what they are, given the stream purpose, I have at least 4 things for Guile that are entirely how to stick to him. How to not let him get away, how to not let him want to do specific things that change the situation. They're not altogether safe things to do all the time, but they are minimal damage to me when he does counter them, and his counter in turn leads to him taking a lot of damage when I choose correctly, or even just do the thing I normally like to do. They are entirely notes on how to condition Guile players, rather than notes on how to defend against them.
Well, as is the canonical natural response to Ryu and Kage, Ryu has defeated his outer darkness.
Shadow
Kage has
works.
faded away. However, as we have the report that the other lounge is currently full, we get to watch more of this Ryu.
I feel as if this player has the defense down, the zoning down, doesn't really try to be frustrating too much, but can probably get there, at least if they're far away. But if they have a hole in their play, and we haven't actually proven this yet, it is actually in their footsies, which is not too insurmountable when you are so good at zoning and defense that no one ever gets to play any footsies.
Indeed. And therefore, in turn, makes him my nemesis.
But Alex is very good at footsies. He's probably the strongest footsie grappler, with Mika being just slightly behind. The key, however, is when you're facing a player like this, who doesn't challenge you, who doesn't want to stay close to you, dashing in on them, either on wake up or otherwise, generally leads to bad things. They're already, usually, so set in their defensive or concept style that you'll get some damage sometimes, but most of the time you're passing up the chance to play the neutral that you could actually win at. You're more so creating a situation that they are comfortable in. So unless you're equally comfortable, there's no point.
In which situation?
After a knockdown mostly. But basically any. Because part of the reason that Ryu is able to set up that good cross-up jump and you really can't do much about it is because he manages to set off some moves and immediately jump after them. Similar to what our Kenbot is intended to help you learn. To deal with, that is.
Sure. I remember some of this being in Guile 2. Or...
Except that Guile is different because Guile doesn't play any footsies, whereas Kenbot tends to play footsies or something like it. It's the beginner, obviously, so it's the beginner form of footsies. He at least hits buttons and moves himself around. And then jumps. But you can generally see that Dwarf is not managing to do a lot of damage in the moments where he dashes in to do something.
Not doing any damage now. So what happened? And more importantly, do I get to fight my Ryu? It seems that I do not.
Oh well. Well, I'm sure the Wolf's lounge will refill, but let's head back over to Cosmic Wolf's side then.
I'm super disappointed. I wanted to fight that Ryu more. But so it goes. Maybe I'll encounter him somewhere else another time. And let's see what we have here. Abigail and Kareen. Yeah?
Certainly it was one match ending.
So it seems. With a victory from our Abigail.
Let's do this.
As we've noted many, many times, it's always surprising when players with the Brazilian flag join lounges, but I think it may sometimes be simply that there's really no way to tell what a US flag means. A US flag can mean Texas, or it can mean New England, or it can mean Seattle. It doesn't really help you too much in terms of understanding how far away from me is this person.
Fight.
But we also don't immediately shift it because, similarly, Brazilian players often tend to have at least some shift in whether or not their internet is good enough to actually play on. But unfortunately we can't tell because obviously it's just not going to look laggy here, except when it's terrible.
Well, depending on how the match comes out, I'll be able to tell soon.
Abigail versus Necalli is not strictly speaking a tough match for Necalli, as he does have a lot of ways to deal with Abigail overall, but the problem is that if Abigail goes on the defense, Necalli has a lot of trouble opening him up, at least in my opinion. He can poke at him forever, and honestly, there's a lot of spaces where Abigail just can't respond. But then he has to like try to get close enough to command grab, which Abigail can see coming. He has to worry about being parried, which doesn't happen too often, but eventually you push yourself out to the point where Abigail could definitely parry. And most of the time you have to kind of walk him down and be ready for a lot of specific things. Since Necalli does not have a lot of normals that really respond well to Abigail whiffing or sticking out his own, you've got to be really careful how you approach the matchup in terms of moving toward the opponent and beating them down.
Well, as is necessary or appropriate, I have gone and checked my notes for Abigail, and I have no levels, matchup levels for him listed. But I do have a long form note which is unfortunately effectively, hey, go poke at the spot some more. So I suppose there's that. It also comes with that for many Abigails, the only thing you can be sure of is that I will keep attacking. Is a reasonable way to work with them. And so we'll see if this is that type.
One relatively easy thing for Necalli to do is in fact to use his close Seismo. This is because, unlike every other fireball in the game, except, like, Colleen, Abigail can't actually do anything about this move, he just blocks it. He can try to get through it, but he takes big risks to do that. So if you understand the Seismo range and can just do it every now and again, just to mix up the actual game plan you have, that's about his best option, what we just saw, to on reaction giant flip. And this is a really valid method of dealing with the situation, but to constantly be on guard for having to do that is a big deal for this character. Especially in situations where he outspaces Necalli but thinks it's time to hit buttons. That's a really good time to use it a lot of the time because even if he does land a hit, the smash still happens, he still gets hit there. So it's more of a shift in how you'd expect it because technically the Seismo itself becomes a footsie tool. Abigail wants to play footsies, he wants to win with his superior buttons, but he can't afford to stick them out if you're going to be hitting something that will beat up his feet all the time. This, of course, is also even more helpful because it increases Necalli's movement speed enough that he can actually pose a serious threat to Abigail. Whereas before, there's always that tiny chance that he'll get in, but mostly Abigail will just hit buttons and keep Necalli away. And unlikely to get whiff punished by anything too heavy, simply because Necalli's stand medium punch, while good, does not tend to lead to a lot of shenanigans, let's say. You have to do like stand medium and to jump over stuff, and then Abigail can just parry, and it's a giant line of things that make the matchup not specifically hard, but the exact example of what we're talking about today. If you don't write the matchup levels, preferably in order, it's hard to remember how to do this correctly, so to speak.
So where do I start becomes the question. I obviously need to train Abigail bot more so that I can install some of the reactions to certain moves, such as the exact range I'm supposed to throw a couple of them and such. But that doesn't necessarily tell me what, like, level 1 is for this.
Karina actually shares a lot of problems with Necalli in this way. She's really good at footsies, but it comes at the price of constantly being in his footsie range and his buttons are longer. Fortunately, Abigail knows this, and mostly will try to walk you down and put you in weird situations. Meaning that the precise method of how to deal with him is distracting him long enough to seppo in, so that he has to deal with things on your terms. Or if he's advancing, use what is used against Zangief, i.e. Light Mujinkyaku. The intention of this Light Mujinkyaku is to whiff most of the time, but because the move recovers in ways that are slightly difficult to understand, and puts its hurt box in a weird place, it's hard to grab onto. Even Zangief can have trouble with it, which is why it's used for that purpose. It also preemptively stops a lot of jumps and whiff punishes a lot of things that you'd expect to otherwise not work. However, it makes the match as a whole feel very scrambly, because wanting to play footsies is the natural form of most Karine players, and therefore telling them, oh no, don't do that, just like, do these incredibly risky random things.
Not something I'm going to adapt to easily.
This is where we get the feeling of making your opponent think about two things in the same moment. Karine is a great character for hitting things like stand medium punch into seppo, but she also hits stand medium punch into crouch medium kick, and other things like that. The idea being, do I really want to hit this crouch medium kick? If my opponent blocks it, I don't get anything much. If my opponent didn't get hit by the medium punch, I don't really know what that's going to benefit, and so on. But Abigail as a character does not have quite the same speed, invincible moves, or similar to make stand medium punch into seppo very dangerous. What happens is that he will eventually start to try to respond to the seppo, and then you will get to play footsies.
You win.
I have the problem of not being able to imagine being, or where I would be that I would want to use the stand medium punch into seppo in the first place and have it land so it can cancel. But thinking about it, that's actually probably me trying to play footsies, and there are plenty of times when I'm relatively close where it would work.
Part of the reason it does work is because stand medium punch is bufferable into seppo. And this is really important if you are used to the concept of buffering, because it means that if Abigail sticks out anything, steps forward, or does anything weird that lets him get to a particular space on screen, or just that you whiff punish and clip him, you definitely can't continue the combo. Abigail's buttons are so long that if you hit with stand medium punch, you can't do crouch medium kick anyway. But he will be in hit stun, he will also be a little bit flustered, let's say, and being able to do that means that he will respect you at that space more, shifting the entire match. Again, sometimes when you write notes like this, your notes will look different than someone else's notes, even for the same character, because your goals are different.
Well, I think my goal then becomes, for the moment, figuring out, getting the experience of where that is and it working at some point so that I can have a bit more emotional context and, in a way, logical context to figure out how to record it and how to think about it.
The problem with learning things that way is always that a particularly skilled or canny opponent will recognize what you're doing and immediately start avoiding the situation altogether.
Definitely.
The easiest way to test this is to lose. I.e., as soon as you realize, oh, I can't tell where I'm supposed... This thing that I wrote down as my own note, I can't tell where I'm supposed to do that. Especially if it's number 1, you should just assume that if you can no longer find the correct spacing for it, then your opponent has shifted already without you even doing it for long, or maybe doing it at all.
Sure.
In short, you get to skip straight to footsies.
Well, I won't object to that. Alright then.
Round 1.
So would the buffered stand medium punch be the first level then? Or, because there's all
Again,
this...
this really has a lot to do with the player. Like, there are definitely Kareem players that will face Abigail with sweep. And this will be a valid way to face Abigail. Sweep and jump. The two of them go together to create a fighting style that lets her deal with this character, at least to some extent, because of the way that her hurt box for sweep interacts with things. But that's not really I want to play footsies a lot Kareem style. She is a footsies character, so you could probably expect that to be one of the things they want to do, but it's different than I want to get to the point where footsies is the main thing we are doing.
Which is more so my sort of thing.
Another thing that makes this useful is that Abigail players often want to stick out buttons when they see you stick out buttons.
But crouch stand medium punch is not the slowest of buttons to whip punish. Oof. I need so much Abigail practice.
This is how you develop things like weird little option selects. For example, Kareem will, once she notices that, can do the buffered stand medium kick into light seppo and then just hit the medium light kick again.
Light.
All these little complex
medium
things.
punches.
No, you're hitting medium punch once, buffering light kick seppo, and then hitting light kick again.
Oh, I see. Just to be even more annoying after the seppo. Or wait, no, that means that if the buffer does not come out, then I've hit light kick, which will hit the whiff punish.
That's usually the case.
I see.
Pros tend to do this sort of thing too, but as they are pros, they tend to only stick to the ones that work really well long term, and the opponent really can't counter that easily. But this isn't really something you should just never do because the pros don't do it, or because you don't always get the same output from it. Because, again, they're pros. They are harder to mess with in terms of their mental stack. And the tool does have a purpose, even at their level of play. It's just recognizing when something needs to evolve from a full-on tactic that you use to get through matches with this character to a shenanigan that you use when you are sure that your opponent will fall back on one of the earlier tactics of their character. It's important to be able to recognize when a player, even if they're super good, has decided, for the next part of this match, I'm going to adapt to doing the simplest form of this play. The thing that you wouldn't expect because everyone will say, nah, no one would play like that. This is high level now, everyone plays clean. And you can get beaten up quite easily by top level players playing riskily simply because you don't expect them to do it. What they have is a better understanding of how and why this is done and when to employ it. But you're only going to learn that most of the time by employing it enough to see when it does or does not work. Necalli can also sometimes use his stomp to anti-air Abigail, because Abigail's jumps often involve him hitting the button. But the timing for this is super hard, and therefore I don't really suggest it as a primary thing at any point. But you can see the other pieces coming in here. Empty jumps help, certain spacings of stomp help, and stand medium punch helps. Figuring out which order these need to go in has a lot more to do with yourself as a player than the Abigail matchup as a whole. Necalli is also a character who often misleads others as to where exactly his hurt boxes are, even when he's blocking. And he doesn't really need to hold his charge in particular ways, making it easier to get very specific things. Namely, to use both sweep and the same seismo in semi-neutral without thinking too hard about it. Abigail's wish is to hit Necalli or push him back out. Necalli can use that against him, recognize when he is himself going to be pushed back, because Abigail doesn't do a ton of lows against his character for some reason, probably would adapt to do so. Walk straight back, i.e. stand, lessening hurt bots and so on, and just seismo immediately. This is difficult, but understanding why a higher level tactic works can sometimes help you to understand what it is supposed to stop from happening, and in turn to understand why you're losing. Even if you cannot execute a high level tactic of some kind, if you understand this tactic is meant to stop my opponent from doing this, you can usually come to the conclusion of, oh, my opponent is probably going to do that a lot because it's presumably a good idea, and otherwise I wouldn't have needed to stop it as much.
Abigail wins. Round one. Fight.
This is why in our digital age it's often better to make your notes on some sort of, I don't know, word processing text document or one of those things. I am of course joking. So that you can quickly rearrange things when they don't seem to be in the correct spacing or the correct order or whatever else. For example, in this case, the concept here is not specifically Cosmic Wolf can do this. Cosmic Wolf can anti-air with seismo, can play footsies with sideball, all of those things. This is quite a slow move. You can't just be instantly learning how to time all this in a match. But it does help reframe the way the match can be played, rather than, oh, I have to go in because I can't deal with him otherwise. You can see the option of, oh, well, I guess I could probably make it so that he can't do too much, or he's constantly at risk of this happening at least. And that changes the perspectives of the other player, even if you couldn't actually execute all of the things necessarily. One of the most important things we are trying to teach through bots, these streams, and any interaction you have with the team in general is precisely that. At the end of the day, the best thing we can teach anyone is how to change their own perspective on matches, or their opponent's perspective, to cause match to flow differently, and hopefully to learn something from those. In this case, for example, constantly having to think about that particular aspect means that their jump timings have changed at least a little bit. This hasn't necessarily led to a lot more things like anti-airs, but it could have. There are definitely times where responding to a jump by forward dash heavy punch is a very Necalli thing to do. Especially once he actually has his V-trigger active. He also has a lot of good ways of taking up so much space, as you've just seen, that he can just move forward into the space Abigail has given up really quickly compared to other characters, without being at any particularly large risk. This only goes away once Abigail has actually reached level 3, or has started to try to read that sort of behavior. All of that has finally changed us to the point of the match that he has probably trained at least a bit, due to the fact that our Abigail Kata, which does not even require you to have a bot, teaches you how to use your heavy buttons against Abigail. But this is against an Abigail who does not have a lot of options, and is trying to close space and control it. Abigail is not really a character that has the close space and control it, so you often see other forms of play. But if you can force him into that spot, heavy buttons work really well against this character, both because of priority and because of how long certain of his moves take to come out as a whole. So just getting to just hit heavy kick or just hit heavy punch in certain situations is a strong thing.
Abigail wins.
Practicing against that move, you probably need the bot for a little bit more.
It's go time.
Alright then.
Similarly, sometimes putting just in your notes, fight the bot, and then actually paying attention to those notes is kind of important.
Yeah, the trick is managing to come back after your long, well, whole stream, for instance, and remember that that particular note says, hey, do this. In any case, let's check out the other lounge while that one refills.
There are still some definite benefits to doing this, though. Sometimes you are in a battle lounge and your opponent doesn't stick around, but you were having trouble in some way. Maybe you managed to make them rage quit, but you still didn't necessarily feel as if you were doing that well. Going back and seeing your notes basically telling you, hey, you were supposed to train against this character. Or, similarly, just deciding, I'm going to play like a one casual match, one ranked match, and ending up with that character that you don't face that often.
Mm-hmm. That would definitely let you then decide to go right back into the bot, because you wouldn't have any distractions.
Round one. Fight.
Sometimes, of course, the thing that the opponent does is not really something the bot covers, and it's not even something the CPU covers.
Looks like you could use more training.
Round 2.
Most of these things you can think through or simply re-watch the match itself after having come to that conclusion and thinking about maybe some frame data, all of these wonderful additions that they've made to tell us this move was this plus at this point. And let you realize there was a mistake being made here in perception.
And sometimes after all that, all you can do is do your best in the replays and then go hunt someone down in a battle lounge and try to test it out. So we're back to Kage for today.
While I would not consider this Kage to be a Zoni style player, they are definitely not close in because they don't seem to want to get close or stay close, and they're not very buttonsy. So I can't really call them pressure either. I would assume therefore that we're going to have to consider them frustration. In fact, that is probably a telegraphed mark of a frustration player. The sort of person who walks backward only to jump at you when you come forward. Even though they could easily be anti-aired, that's the first test that they'll do if they don't have too many other options at that range. If I back away from you and remove your capacity to hit me, and you walk forward, does that mean that you want to hit me? And if you try to hit me, or are thinking about how to hit me, will you also anti-air? And to be frank, the answer is often, and I mean really often, simply no, you're not likely to actually anti-air. Particularly if your character has a really difficult anti-air.
Alex wins.
Or a massive number of variable ones, and you would have had to train the specifics of it. Characters like Ibuki and Kage who functionally have really good jump-in buttons are particularly good at this, once they've learned to either hit with the tip of the button or move back in unexpectedly and jump over your head because your character doesn't anti-air well that way. These things work out for them fairly quickly in the frustration player mindset, meaning that honestly, DeWolf's main focus in here should be walking forward while being ready to anti-air, more so than trying to hit the opponent on the ground. Doing it at the correct range also means that one can just block on a reaction to a lot of things and not worry too much. And the worst case scenario is that you can just walk down the opponent because they are too afraid to ever actually jump, but they don't want to stay close to you anyway. A player who is not comfortable in that space where you could hit them often does this. They don't necessarily want to play footsies because they don't know if they can win them. And they don't necessarily want to jump because they've either been anti-aired or clearly can see that you don't really care and are going to try anyway. At this point, they either have to use Meteor, be super creative, or just run out of space to be in, i.e. get cornered, and in Alex's case, get grabbed. In fact, you can see it just a moment ago. The idea of, I'm walking forward to the exact space where I can anti-air you, and you start to walk backward. Okay, well, I'll do that again. And eventually, they either must jump and are just waiting for you to fall into that rhythm instead, and still miss the anti-air, which again, happens a lot, or they're going to get pushed all the way to the corner. This is particularly stressful on Alex because it removes a lot of his other tools. He can't do anything in those situations due to charge, and Flash Shot doesn't necessarily reach, leaving him with very few things that feel like real options. He simply doesn't get to do that many things in this situation other than walk the opponent down.
Alex wins.
But we'll probably run a few more of these and actually get at least one match between DeWolf and Kansuki Dynasty, i.e. Rune Siren tonight. If our target does not leave, maybe a couple more.
Let's do this.
But we're probably going to be coming closer to the end of the stream and most likely not returning to Cosmic Wolf's Lounge. Knowing that timing, therefore, he'll most likely close it. So, if you are looking to join and get a few games in yourself before stream does end, you will still be looking for DeWolf only.
I really gotta say these are some great ads. They really did a good job putting them together.
I'm beginning to wonder if that's going to be like their thing, because I would be completely behind that as a thing. Not to have other types of ads, just whenever anyone wants to have their ad space in this game, just draw stuff. That's why we have artists on staff.
It sounds like an excellent plan to me.
Fight.
And it's so easy to look at that people are less likely to turn things off.
Yeah, the other ones were a little busy. I think that was, in the end, kind of their larger problem. The stylization of just having really good art. Who complains about this? Sadly, the concern I have heard is that, despite this, people don't necessarily like the shirts as much as the art for the ads, and they might want to put the art for the ads on the shirts, which would be very meta.
On the other hand, if it makes the money.
Yeah, but I mean, they haven't done that yet, which means that there's no one who's going to be getting precisely what they want if their idea was, I would really like a shirt of this ad, but the ad is not for a shirt of itself. It is an ad for a different shirt. Being flooded by requests to make a different shirt might not be quite so much in terms of the profit they were thinking of.
Perhaps.
Round two. Fight.
But if this is a thing. This is a thing. I would not necessarily buy a shirt of Chun-Li in her standard canonical. There's a word I'm looking for here that I'm losing. That pose that they use for nearly everything. Thematic. I don't know. But I would absolutely buy a shirt of the artwork we just saw. So someone should let them know this. Still, the overall idea works well. You get more artwork, and who doesn't like artwork for their favorite games and characters?
Alright then, but I get to keep the win. Anyway, I made the bothersome mistake of not checking my notes before going into this matchup because DeWolf is a member of the team and I am used to fighting him. But I have been struggling and learning with him most recently out of everyone else on the team. So I should refresh myself. However,
Round one. Fight.
I think that I do have it. And it turns out that I did seem to remember something close enough to it that it had a similar effect. Or rather, that I got there eventually.
For most people, this is a relatively positive feeling. When you're thrown into a match, you don't have time to read your notes. You manage to eke out the win, or sometimes even win really well. Or even just play really well, even if you don't win. And then check your notes and think, wow, I must have messed that up so much. I wonder how I did so well, and then realize, oh, I was just doing all the things that were in my note. Go me!
Indeed. I remembered my first level almost perfectly. It took me a little bit to remember the second half of it.
Fight.
And the second level is sort of intuitive. And other than that, it was just simply application of style.
That is, in fact, a general thing. There are very few characters where you've learned to fight them over time, can punish them fairly well, can deal with any shenanigans they have, where the first two things aren't enough to do that. If you were very focused, there's a really high chance that if you can get to level 1 and 2, lines 1 and 2, it doesn't matter how you perceive it, the rest is playing your style until your opponent adapts so hard that everything is still playing out the way you expect it to, and somehow you're still not winning. That being probably the most important thing. But most of the time, by then, you are definitely having more fun in some way.
Indeed. Alright, so let's see if I get to visit this Kage. Or if they have wandered off.
It's go time.
Although, actually, looking at this note now in more detail,
Let's do this.
I'm confused why it is to use jump forward medium kick to stop the head crush, rather than my medium punch that I prefer. But I think it was something that the hurtbox was a little more reliable.
You weren't actually trying to air it though.
I mean, I
Forward
know,
jump medium kick takes you over his head and crosses him up.
Karin Kanzuki.
that requires a different timing then as well.
Mm-hmm.
But if he's trying to head crush me or such, is that even, like, true? Because he would be where I took off from, and I would be where he took off from, and I can't imagine that hitting. However, there's a simple
well, it
solution to all
does.
of this, and that is to simply fight the wolf again.
But it does generally work.
Alright. Well, I need to add that to my notes then, because I'm going to perceive it as an air-to-air. So, 9MK cross-up.
Round one.
This is partially because Head Crush is a move that has a long and strange range in front of it, meaning that the Alex player doesn't have a specific reason to try to get as close to you as possible anyway. But we are facing off with another Ryu.
Oops.
And we're back to the same quote-unquote problem. Their idea of how to play the matchup is very specific but solid. There's no, I'm going to abuse this tactic that you can't stop. Or even that this tactic is really strong.
Round two. Fight.
And this can throw you off quite a lot because, again, it increases your mental stat. Sometimes you need to make a note just to remind yourself that, you know what, this particular thing that they're doing is not scary. It does have a relatively easy counter, and I could just do that, whatever it is. This is part of the reason why Kata 22, our famous Kata 22, is exactly like that. Because every time you let Ryu get away with a close range fireball, the player can easily see, oh, I should keep doing that. It's not hurting you. But if they were otherwise managing to keep up, this is a really dangerous thing for you to have to face. Partially because them hitting this makes this happen. It gives them the feeling, oh, I should just crouch medium kick and then jump. This is a particularly hard thing to anti-air, especially if your training in Kata 22 was a little different and you ended up mostly only associating the responses with the Hadouken itself and not the situation. Because most of the time, even though you cannot hurt the opponent as much, recognizing, oh, they hit the crouch medium kick, there was no fireball, but they did jump, and now, because of the nature of this interaction, they're too close. They're at that range where we suggest to you in the kata, no, don't try to hit the button, dash under them, or back jump, or whatever your character has that deals with this specific spacing. Because now they're too close to you for the stand medium kick or whatever it is to hit, and you should not do that. If you recognize this purely by, okay, there was a fireball and I should respond to fireball by doing this. This is also why the kata is built the way it is, to make sure that not every projectile, even from close, is intended to make you do this.
Round 2. Fight.
Picking out that sort of thing, even though it's not really that clear a tactic, helps you understand both the situational aspect of the opponent's plan and your own responses to it. In this case, understanding that their idea is to hit crouch medium into jump changes the flow of the match, even if you can't land any damage for it, and they're not really taking any risk directly by doing it. You can take away the advantage they were gaining, which is specifically to cross you up, make you block, and then get what is close to a mix-up, especially in this very slight lag we're seeing. However, you should also know that most people, once you've gotten yourself to this mental state, as is being shown, you actually can just, like, crouch medium kick anyway. Sorry, stand medium kick anyway. You don't actually care or need the player to throw the fireball, and if they did, your stand medium kick probably didn't do anything because they cancelled on block. And while it is not always a true block string, there's a bunch of other little things you can learn in there.
You win.
Is this worth a note? Maybe, maybe not. It's very much up to you understanding how much does this thing damage my style? How much is my opponent likely to do it as a result of it damaging my style?
Round 1.
How likely is this to come up in general?
Fight.
And in the end, when in doubt, write it down. Because these things are how you get control of matches, and control of matches is among the most unnerving things, even all the way to the top. Top players will sometimes at least crack or feel strange levels of cognitive discomfort simply because their opponent took control of the match in a way they were not expecting, or at a level they weren't expecting. It might not make them do silly things, but it can certainly make them worry more about what their plans are and how effective those plans can be.
So in this case, I suppose for the first level of Ryu, I would want to write down something about Kata 22 in terms of, I don't know if it's checking with the medium kick or making sure to effectively try to evade forward. Probably it is just the checking. Because as much as that's part of the kata and such, and I've trained on it plenty, I do have it sort of associated with the fireball directly. Because that's sort of how the kata is arranged, and how my mind works. But at the same time, just reminding myself to use it a bit more expansively is effective. Zangief. Alright.
Asugano resident.
Let's see if it is indeed a Zangief. Well, I add that note to my view.
Round 1. Fight.
And that was partly a mistake, because now, instead of rereading my Zangief notes, I made the Ryu one. Oof, this is laggy. Did you see where he was? I don't remember.
I don't know, it's that weird kind of stuttery that I can only fight Zangief in. Only character I'm willing to play in this matchup. In this lag, that is. Although I always feel like it's bad in the other way, because while Chun-Li's jump is very floaty, and there's a ton of things, good things that Zangief can do to deal with her, I feel like the lag makes it just a little bit too hard to do this consistently. So I don't generally bother.
Yes, this is a little high for me.
Round 2.
Not sure if there's anything to be
And
done
in
about
fact, may
that.
not be worth the rematch at all. So given that, our Eunice bots were released yesterday, last night specifically. You can find them at 2-mk.org/Eunice-bots. The newest ones are not marked as newest for various reasons, but the Gordeau type, and they're all advanced, so you should find them all at the bottom of the page. Feel free to attempt to put these in. They're a little bit harder to actually enter than previous. If you have no interest in those particular ones, you can continue to watch our Twitter 2_MK_FGC for any releases of further bots, and of course the schedule for any streaming we actually do.
Indeed, and I don't really gain anything from fighting him in this lag, so with that I think we are done for the night, and I hope that you all have a good week. Try out some bots, write up some matchup notes, if nothing else to take the mental load off of you.
We will definitely be back around Thursday for Kame House, and on Friday for Batista Bot. The Tuesday and Wednesday streams, you'll have to watch our Twitter to be sure of. You're probably going to get one, but we don't know exactly which yet.
Indeed. And you can find all of our bots on our website, 2-mk.org, and all of our what's up for the week, what's up for the day, at our Twitter, 2_MK_FGC. So have a good night, everyone, and happy training.